Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's event, Speaking Volumes, with author Bo Caldwell, talking about why I write. I am Cindy Hill, and I'm the president of the Los Altos Library Endowment, also known as LALE. LALE supports the Los Altos Library services and collections by enhancing the scientific, medical, and technological materials for all ages, and we fund special items and projects, including our mini bookmobile, affectionately known as Go-Go Biblio. The LALE board members are honored to host our annual Speaking Volumes event, taking advantage of our virtual meeting room so all of you can enjoy listening to our speaker, Bo. Bo is looking forward to your questions and will respond to them at the end of her talk. So please type them in the Q&A section, which is found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. A recording link will be found on YouTube and will be posted to the libraries and LALE's websites in the next couple of days for your and your friends' viewing pleasure. Please share the link. Now it's my delight to introduce Bo Caldwell. She grew up in Los Angeles and graduated from Stanford University, where she later held a Wallace Stegner Fellowship and a Jones Lectureship in creative writing. Over the years, many organizations have recognized Bo for her writing talents. Bo received a fellowship in literature from the National Endowment for the Arts, an artist fellowship from the Arts Council of Santa Clara County, the Georgia Shreve Prize in Fiction at Stanford University, and the Joseph Henry Jackson Award from the San Francisco Foundation. Bo's first novel, The Distant Land of My Father, was published in 2001 and became a national bestseller. It was one of Los Angeles Times' best books for 2001, and Book Sense 76 selected it in both hardcover and paperback. In 2008, Santa Clara County's annual Silicon Valley Read selected her book as a Silicon Valley Read choice. Her second novel, City of Tranquil Light, published in 2010, was also a national bestseller and one of O Magazine's 10 must-reads for October 2010. Bo's personal essays have appeared in O, the Oprah Magazine, the Washington Post Magazine, and America Magazine, and her short stories have been included in Story, Plowshares, Epic, and other literary journals. She lives in Northern California, Palo Alto, with her husband, novelist Ron Hansen. We are excited to talk with Bo tonight for many reasons. Her talk is a natural bridge from Silicon Valley Read's 2021 theme of connecting because she wants to explore why I write, the title for tonight's talk, as is about connections, her own connection. Bo, welcome to Speaking Volumes.
Sorry?
Perfect.
Great. You would think I would have learned that by now. Thank you, Cindy, very much. And thank you very much to the Los Altos Library Endowment for having me. Just a sec, I have to get rid of there we go. Thank you to the Los Altos Library Endowment for having me tonight. And thank you specifically to Cindy Hill and Mary Popick of the endowment, and to Bryant Bow, who's supervising librarian for Santa Clara County Libraries, for helping us out and making this possible and helping me to be present and concentrate. Libraries, it's great to be with you, even though we're not in the library tonight. I'm sure that, like a lot of you, I share a tremendous fondness, and I really treasure libraries and have since I was little. And like I said, I'm sure that a lot of you feel the same way. That started with story time at the library in my town when I was a little kid. And then in junior high, I got some control in my life, which meant that the library was adjacent to the junior high. So I could go there as much as I wanted after school, and I did. And it was wonderful. Just that's when I had the freedom to browse the stacks, to just wander. And the thing about libraries was you could get lost safely. You could just like sink into anything that you wanted, and you were right there. And I'd come home every day with just armloads of books. And didn't read them all, but just kind of it was just like being the wealthiest person in the world, because anything that struck my fancy, I could check it out and bring it home, and it would be mine for a few days or a couple weeks or whatever that was. When my kids were little, I lived in Palo Alto. I actually live in Cupertino now. But when my kids were little, we lived in Palo Alto, and I used to go to Palo Alto Main Library or College Terrace Library, or sometimes the Stanford Art Library, which at that time didn't require an ID to enter, as a place to write. The kids were home and I needed a quiet place and a desk. And that's pretty sure you can get that at a library. And then in addition, to be at the quiet desk surrounded by books was just, it was like kind of some osmosis taking place where I was just in the right place to be working. As Cindy mentioned, Silicon Valley Reads in 2008, my novel was selected as the Silicon Valley Reads book, which was an amazing experience. I was so honored. And it meant that I think in the month of February that year, I think I maybe did 25 events or something like that. It was kind of like, if it's Tuesday, it must be Belgium or whatever that movie was. There was an event almost every night, and it was wonderful. I was kind of running on autopilot a little bit, but I think I visited all of the libraries in Santa Clara County. And it was really, in a nerd kind of way, it was really cool. I loved it, and it meant a lot to me. Pre-pandemic, I went back to the library on a novel that I'm working on that I'll talk a little bit about later. And I found I loved working at the Cupertino Library. There's a place in there called the Quiet Room on the second floor, and it overlooks, I guess, redwood trees and then the hills in this beautiful place that we live. And I had kind of like my favorite spots there. And there was a period where I just needed to be out of the house for a while to work. And I've missed it this year. Again, it's just, if I get frustrated, I can wander for a little bit and then come back to work. So all of that is to say that it just means so much to me to be here. And just one final note, the Los Altos Library in particular is special to me. My mom, I grew up in Los Angeles, as Cindy said, and my mom was still living there when in 2003 she had a stroke. My dad had passed away in 2000. Mom had a stroke in 2003. And about a year and a half later, she left LA and moved up here to be closer to me, and which was wonderful. She passed away in 2012, but we had this amazing relationship for about 7 years. And her favorite spots were the library, either Los Altos Library or sometimes Palo Alto. But the Los Altos Library in particular was a godsend because, especially at the beginning when she was still readjusting to life in a wheelchair, she could handle the Los Altos Library. It was so comfortable for her, and it gave her some autonomy that she could still browse the stacks in her wheelchair without me hovering over her. She was limited to books at eye level, but, I'd help her get down something from the top if she saw it. But anyway, the Los Altos Library just has a special place in my heart. Libraries kind of mean home and refuge. When I walk in, I kind of let my breath out. And I think it's kind of a mystery that whatever, it kind of feels the same for me, when I walk into a library anywhere. It's not about the home library or the one I've spent the most time in. It's just walking into a library is a really special connection, which I'll be talking about. So I am going to talk about why I write tonight and about this kind of connection. And for me, but it's really about work, whatever work you love, that you feel passionately about, that fills you up in a way that maybe nothing else does. So I hope that a lot of what I say kind of translates, or that you identify with it, because for me it's writing, but it could be anything else: gardening, painting, sculpting, not even something artistic, building stuff, whatever floats your boat, whatever is really, really important to you. So I hope some of this makes sense to you, non-writers. Also, I wanted to say something. I thought long and hard about the topic for tonight, but I also thought about how to do this. I started by writing basically an essay about that I'm basically going to talk through. So as an essay, one of the reasons I'm a writer is because I'm better on paper. I think I'm more articulate on paper and I can kind of, address things better. But I felt like, and I really wrestled with this, I felt like I just didn't want to read it because we've had so much distance for the year that I just didn't want that added distance of me reading. And even though I can't see you, you can see me. And I'd rather just talk to you. So that may mean I stumble a little bit or whatever, but it was important to me to kind of be present and be right now instead of reading whatever I wrote earlier for this. So I hope that makes sense. For a long time, I thought that I wrote because, there's a joke answer, because I'm good at it. But for me, I mean that it came more easily to me than other things. I thought for a long time it was because I enjoyed it and because it came more easily and it made me happy sometimes on good days. But as I've thought about it, it is much deeper than that. It is a connection, and a connection, implies two things, a two-way kind of thing. And I've thought a lot about that this week. And so I want to talk about that. But before I get to that, I need to tell you a little bit about my writing path and kind of how I've gotten here. And it's been kind of the through line through my life since I was 18. And so I wanted to kind of go back and do that a little bit. I wasn't one of those kids who wrote all the time. I don't remember doing that. Nobody's ever said I did. Some writers say, oh, I was writing stories at 5 and all that stuff. I don't remember being that kid, but I was a reader. Again, the library, Nancy Drew books. I could walk down 10 minutes from our house and buy the new Nancy Drew book when it came out. It was $1.37. And I kind of knew when the new one was coming out. They were being revised right about then in the early 60s. So reading was really important. Gone with the Wind. My dad read Mark Twain to me when I was a kid. And I could tell that I'm not sure he read anything else to me. I mainly remember Mark Twain. And I could tell that it was important, like the tone of his voice and just his manner told me that reading was important and that this was this weird thing of this made up story was important to this man who was my father, who was a lawyer and dealt with very serious parts of life. But this made up story was really important to him. That left an impression on me. That changed, the non-writer part changed when I was 17. It was second semester, senior year in high school in San Marino, California, which is next to Pasadena. And we were finally allowed to choose an elective besides which language you wanted to study or something like that. And so one of the choices was creative writing. I don't remember making a decision. I just kind of did it, I think. And I think it just called to me. I don't really understand in retrospect exactly how that happened, but I loved it. And it was one of those times in my life where my life took a little bit of a left turn. It was that class and that choice had a permanent effect on me or left a permanent mark on me. I wrote, the first story I wrote, I think, but it was in that class, was about a man named George who's really, he blames his boring life on his boring wife. So he gets up one morning and he's decided that he's going to kill her. He's going to shoot her. And then he's going to leave and live this glorious life that he has in his imagination. So he goes through the story, tells about his day, how excited he is. He has airline tickets. This is 1973. He has the tickets. He's gone to a travel agent, all that. He's completely ready. And that evening, his wife calls him into to see something on TV. He says, George, I think you'd like this, after meatloaf for dinner and all that. She calls him in and says, I think you'd like this. And he goes in and then he puts the gun away. And I think the story was called Just Another Day. And you realize that he's been doing this every day for a long time and that he's probably never going to do it. That was I think my parents wondered where that came from. They were happily married. I don't think anybody was planning on doing away with anybody. And I think they they didn't make a big deal out of it, but I think they wondered. But you know what? I wondered where it came from, because this weird thing happened that when I wrote it, it was me, but not me. You know, I know that that's what our unconscious kind of is, but experiencing it as a 17-year-old was exciting. And it was particularly exciting right then. And I think this kind of talks about that writing to me is a relationship. I needed writing right then. I had kind of peaked early academically in ninth grade, straight A student, all that stuff. And I think I just got tired. There was nothing dramatic. I think I just got tired. But sophomore, junior, and senior years, I just kind of coasted exactly when I was supposed to be really performing for college applications. And I didn't feel very good about myself. I didn't like getting C's on tests, and I didn't like showing up unprepared, but I just wasn't motivated to do it for whatever reason. But all of a sudden I was good at something again. And that teacher encouraged me. And it just, like I said, there was just kind of a click. And it was that connection that I wouldn't know that it was a connection for a long time. Just something felt good. I stayed in touch with that teacher for a long time, which meant a lot to me. She has passed away in the last maybe 10 years ago or something. But we stayed in touch for a long time. I sent her stories when I got them published and that kind of thing. And I am forever indebted to her. And it just is a reminder to me of what a teacher can do for us. Just the tremendous impact that the right teacher at the right time can have for us. So after oh, by the way, I rewrote that story in college. And because I kept kind of recycling stories, but when in the revised version, when George walks in after Martha calls him, she shoots him. So there you go. In college, I studied creative writing at Stanford. I was an English, you could major in English. And then within English, you could be, I think, in literature or creative writing. And within creative writing, you could be fiction or poetry. I think it was something like that. And I was a creative writing major. I wasn't a great student, but once again, those creative writing classes were what got me excited and what I loved. I loved listening to other people's work and seeing what people my age or a couple years older were doing. That was amazing. And, it was the first time I learned how to talk about stories and how to talk about as a writer, not a reader. We weren't talking about symbolism and theme. We were talking about dialogue and character and point of view and plot and narration and all those kinds of things. I had wonderful teachers, again, Al Young, who maybe a lot of you know, Nancy Packer, who was at Stanford for a long time, and I knew her again later, and Tobias Wolff, so not too shabby. I remember a particular moment in Toby's class. I think it was the end of the quarter. This is about 1977, and he had just had a short story accepted by Mademoiselle. And so for the end of the quarter, he read us his story, which he hadn't done all quarter. And it might have been Toby's story called Say Yes, but it was a Tobias Wolff story in that it was focused on a moment after which nothing was the same. It was just a moment. It was just a conversation between a man and wife. But you as the reader knew that their lives were a little bit, and the relationship were a little bit altered after that. That was amazing to me. Like I said, I'd written a story about somebody trying to kill their spouse. And he showed me that that story showed me that it could be like life, about the small things that alter where we're going or how we're going to get there. After graduating from Stanford, barely, like I said, I was not a good student, but I did graduate. A little bit after graduation, through kind of one thing and another, I was hired by IBM as a technical writer. And I began the kind of adopted the age-old model of working for somebody else by day and doing my own stuff at night. So I kept writing short stories, started sending them off. At IBM, I was writing a user's guide for their large database at the time. It was called IMS. And I was writing the application, not the user's guide, the application programmer's guide of how to use this monstrous thing. And I had to learn it really well. I had to learn it very thoroughly. I dreamt about it, and I did what I was told. I was being paid a good salary and all that. I kind of thought, this is never going to, what I want to be doing is writing these stories that are getting rejected constantly. But something I learned was, it's my belief that no writing is wasted. And so I learned that because years later, decades later, when I was writing The Distant Land of My Father, I had to, there was a lot of research that went into that book. Everything from street food in Shanghai in the 1930s to the Japanese takeover or occupation of Shanghai, then the communist takeover years later, a lot of history, and I had to learn a lot more than what's in the book. There's the idea of the tip of the iceberg, and I had to know a lot more than I was letting on in order to kind of distill it and make it relevant to my story. So when I was writing all that in the late 1990s, one day something felt familiar about the process, about what I was doing, and I realized it was thank you, IBM, because that writing had taught me how to do that, how to take a really complicated or complex subject and work through it till I could kind of boil it down for what I needed. So that was IBM. I started sending out stories. I got a lot of rejection notes. For early writers, it would be like the rejection note, it was a good day if it was signed or if it said, try us again. That's kind of what, I don't know what things are like now online and all that, but it was cool to get a signature. Eventually I also kept taking classes. I took writing classes at Foothill. I went to writing conferences in the summer at Squaw Valley, once up at Centrum in Port Townsend. I just kind of kept working. And my first story was published I had 2 stories published in 1987. So, 12 years after graduating. And they were, I don't think it's coincidence that by then I'd had my 2 kids. I was a mother by then. There are writers who say that parenthood and writing or being an artist don't work together. And my experience has been the opposite. I don't think it's coincidence that I didn't get a story published until after I had children, because I think the stories got better after I was a mother because it deepened me. And it also forced discipline on me. Time was no longer endless. I had to kind of get my act together, and I learned to use half an hour for writing, and that I didn't have to wait for 4 hours of uninterrupted time. So I got stories, started getting a couple stories published, and then in 1989, I applied for and was accepted as a Stegner Fellow at Stanford, which was amazing. And in the kind of timeline, that was a peak. That was a big deal. It's very competitive, and I couldn't believe that Stanford was taking my writings that seriously. I mean, I took it seriously, but it taught me a lot of things in those 2 years of the fellowship. I learned even more how to read other people's work and how to write. We had to turn in 2 stories a quarter, 3 quarters a year for 2 years. So it was a rigorous program. It was different professors leading the workshop. But the other thing that it really did for me was it was another boost of confidence. That high school teacher had kind of changed things by believing in me. And Stanford, being willing to accept me in this program and even pay me a small stipend, kind of gave me street cred with my family and friends. I'd been doing that for a long time and didn't have much to show for it. A couple of publications that nobody had ever heard of, including me, until I sent my stories to them. And, it meant that maybe I felt like from family and friends, like maybe she does have something. Maybe there's something going on. And maybe what she's doing is important. And that was the other part of the Stegner Fellowship. I was with people to whom this was really important. And that mattered. And that was a tremendous gift. I don't know how things are now at Stanford because things have changed a lot over the last year. But at that time, after you had been a Stegner Fellow, you could apply for something called a Jones Lectureship. And you could only apply for a Jones. Only former Stegner Fellows could apply for the Jones. The Jones was a 3-year lectureship teaching fiction writing to undergrads. And it was a great job. And I was chosen. I didn't get it the first year I applied, but I got it the second. You had to have been a Stegner Fellow within 3 years or something like that. I taught for 3 years. I loved it. I also taught continuing studies. I loved that too. The adults were very serious about wanting to do this, but I kind of burned out. I'm an introvert by nature, and I found after 3 years that showing up in the classroom and kind of being vulnerable to these people and talking about something as important as writing, it got harder for me instead of easier as time wore on. And around then, I was offered a job editing a business book that led to other ghostwriting and editing projects, and that allowed me not to teach anymore, but to be writing full time, one way or another, and that's been a really good fit for me. And that's kind of where things are now. I haven't done any paid work the last few years, but to date, I guess I have a dozen. I think I published a dozen short stories, a dozen essays, 2 novels, and then several ghostwritten business books or other kinds of things. There's a lot of stuff that never saw the light of day. There's a completed novel, and then a couple of 2 or 3 fragments maybe, and some stories and all that, which leads me to kind of say, I love what I do. It's also hard work. It can also be dispiriting. There's no certainty about it for somebody like me. I'm not somebody who, a publisher snaps up my book as soon as they hear there's a manuscript, or they buy it on spec or anything like that. It's very uncertain financially and kind of every other way. I don't know what's going to happen with whatever I'm doing. So, which kind of leads to the question of why do it? Why do I write? It is a connection, and as I said earlier, I didn't understand that for a long time. But writing allows me to access a part of myself that I'm unable to connect to in any other way, as far as I know. And it feels different. The part I'm connecting to feels different than the unconscious to me. I know it kind of is, but it feels like the writing compartment of the writer compartment of this unconscious or something like that. I don't care about those labels. But it allows me to get to that part of myself that I can't get to in any other way. And when it feels good, and I think that's what happened in high school, even in that class, I was experiencing that connection for the first time. It wasn't just that it felt comfortable to me to do. It was a click. It was a connection, and it was a meaningful kind of, almost a meaningful relationship was beginning for me. I like that feeling a lot, that kind of rightness about it. And I think I was talking about that. I'm just going to read a couple sentences. I think I was talking about this without knowing it in the first few pages of The Distant Land of My Father. My narrator says, as I stood in the doorway watching my father, waiting for him to feel my presence, I felt certain inside that I was in exactly the right place. This house, this doorway, this night, this father. And she goes on. I think that was me, the writer, kind of talking to myself. That book was really important to me. I think I was 46 when it was published. I'd been working for a long time. I don't think I'd tried another novel. I didn't think I ever would write a novel. But this one came along, and that's a different story that I can get into later if you want. But it worked. And so I learned that connection is is kind of what I need. I need that connection to a piece of work for the piece of work to work. I also learned that that connection can nourish me and nurture me and even save me. That came to me in the summer of 2002. My husband was teaching in England for 6 weeks, and so my kids and I went along and lived in England with him for 6 weeks. My daughter had just graduated. My son was in high school. My daughter had just graduated from high school. We left a few days after graduation, and when we got back, she was going to leave for college in Southern California very quickly, like 3 days later. And so I was bereft. I had dreaded empty nest for like 15 years. I knew it was coming, and I really dreaded my kids going away, even though I knew it was the right thing and what, of course, was best for them. But I was in a funk. And so in England, the days were just slipping away. And I was working on the novel that would become City of Tranquil Light. I was mostly doing research. I wasn't in a place where I could really write fiction right then, but I was doing a lot of research. And one day when I was kind of thinking about all this and kind of, imagining the whole thing of getting home and her leaving, something came to me and said, the novel will save you. And I didn't really have to wonder what it meant. I just kind of knew I have this other place, like another child almost. I have another place that I have a connection to, and that will get me through this. I don't know if I'm explaining that very well, but it's a real strong belief of mine that the writing saves me over and over again. It's gotten me through grief after losing my mom. It's gotten me through other hard times. It's just something that, God willing, will always be there. And that, like I said, kind of a two-way street. A story about it being a two-way street, that was me kind of needing writing. I think that for me, that writing part has kind of a life of its own, and I don't always get to be the boss. So after that novel that I was working on in 2002, I kept working on it, and I wasn't getting very far. A couple years later, 2004, I'd probably written about 80 pages. I had tried over and over again. I had changed the point of view from first to third. I think I had changed the tense from past to present. I'd gone back again. I would work with one chapter over and over again and just never felt right. In September of 2004, I was diagnosed with stage 1 breast cancer, and I'm healthy today and almost 17 years out. And so I had a kind of garden variety, and I had a very good prognosis and all that, but obviously it was a big thing. And I had chemo and radiation. And I put the novel aside for a while, and I was doing some paid work at that time, and I found I could do the paid work, and it felt really good to be productive. But I couldn't connect with the novel. And every time I tried to look at it, once in a while I'd kind of bring it up on the computer and think, maybe I can work on a paragraph, maybe I can just read some. It just looked awful. It looked like awful writing that someone else had done. I felt no connection to it. And I have a very wise friend, and I would talk to her about it. And she said really just very flatly, she said, it's not time yet. She knew what I'd gone through physically and that it was a lot. She said, you need to rest. It's not time yet. And she just kept saying it very firmly and almost kind of angrily a couple times when I kept trying it anyway. 2 years passed. In September of 2006, we were in Mexico, staying in one house with I think 2 or 3 other couples. Staying in one house for an introvert was hard. It was kind of a nightmare as far as lots of together time. But one day everybody went out on a boat, and I had the house to myself. And I got out, I didn't have a laptop then. I got out a pad of paper and a pencil, and I pulled a table underneath a ceiling fan. It was really hot and no air conditioning. And I just started writing. And a lot of what I wrote came to be the last chapter of City of Tranquil Light. And it had clicked. The connection was back. I had the voice, and just something had changed, and we were just kind of back in business. And I think the writer in me, I don't get to boss it around. Sometimes she's not ready to work, or it's not time, or whatever. But anyway, we had finally connected, and things went much better after that. I want to talk a little bit about hindrances, because like any connection, my writing connection can be stable or it can be unstable. There can be static, noise, interference. There can be problems, even aside from the one that I just talked about, where that part of me wasn't ready to work right then. For me, fear, a lot of us, fear is a big hindrance, and something that I have to deal with a lot. And I know that I'm not alone in that. There are days that I wake up, it's an odd thing, because there are days where I wake up excited to get to work, and then 2 hours later, it's really hard to get myself to my desk because fear has kind of taken over. And the way that the fear comes out is, you name it. What if? What if it's not good? What if I don't finish it? What if I finish it and it's terrible? What if no one likes it? What if it never sells? What if I'm doing this forever? What if I'm a fraud? Maybe I had some good luck before. What if I can't do this after all? What if I'm fooling myself that none of this makes sense? These 200 pages, on and on. The way I'll talk about dealing with fear in a minute, but that's like, I think that's the biggest hindrance for me as far as getting to work. And like I said, I'll talk about more specifically how I deal with it, but I mostly have to just kind of bulldoze over it and tell myself that it's not real and just get to work anyway, because action and working are the only things that help. I can't usually talk myself out of it. Another hindrance for me is the temptation or trap of sounding like someone else, or of trying to please someone else. It's the temptation of letting external voices guide me instead of my inner voice. Those external voices can be, people around me, but it also can be just kind of like what I think they want. Maybe nobody's saying anything, but it's what I think they want. It's what I think an editor wants. It's what I think that my book should sound like. Should. That's a kind of giveaway. What I think it should sound like. It's what it's what I want to sound like. Whatever. But my feeling is that it's coming from the outside, and me trying to sound like something outside instead of me looking within and trying to listen and honor that connection. I have a story about that. Years ago, when my daughter was just born, I took a creative writing class at UC Berkeley Extension. And the teacher was wonderful. She's a woman named Thaisa Frank. And she told this story that recently she'd been sitting at her computer working, and she all of a sudden realized that she had kind of a little smile on her face, as though she were at a cocktail party, kind of making chat with people. And she realized she was on the wrong track. And that, I really get that. I can get into worrying about, is this funny? Is it clever? And all those kinds of things. And I think I really, I had an experience with it on the novel I'm working on. The novel I'm working on, which I'm not going to go into specifics about it, but I've been working on it for a long time, I think 8 years. And it's been through several major revisions. I've changed not the gender of the character, but I've changed the character, who she is, and her age. And just I've revised, meaning re-visioned, re-seen it several times. And the first draft, looking back on it, was pretty awful. And an agent kind of told me as much, and I was devastated. And I think what happened is I really had this idea of what I thought that novel should be. You know, I'd published 2 and I wanted to go again, not just for publishing, but just it's that, you know, the end of the process is so exciting, not the publishing part, but writing. As a book really comes together, a friend of mine says that the best writing takes place in the last 10%. And the last parts of finishing a novel are, in my experience, wonderful. And it's tempting to just want to get there again. But I at least have to go through all the hard stuff first. So I think that I was so eager to get there again that I had this idea of what my 3rd novel should be like, as far as like the tone and, you know, kind of how it was going to be described and all that. And so I think a lot of the stuff, a lot of the voice and what I was doing came from an external idea instead of that connection. I think I'm on the right track. As I said, several revisions, and it feels closer and truer than it ever has to me. So I take that as encouragement, and I'll keep you posted. I got a ways to go, but I'm getting there. So if the hindrances are fear and that temptation, for me, there are also kind of helps or things that strengthen that connection. And those to me are, and these are things that I do. One is, and some of this is from Julia Cameron, who wrote The Artist's Way. I like her books very much, and they really helped me. And one of the things she says is that she encourages her readers to tell God, the universe, the muse, whatever, however you want to address this, you take care of the quality, I'll take care of the quantity. In other words, my job is to show up and work for an hour, half hour, 3 hours, whatever. My job is to show up and work, and I will count on my help, my creative self, my, you know, whatever I want to count on to get me there on quality. But I have to show up. So that's one thing that helps me, is focusing on quality, not quantity, and just showing up. The second is to kind of accept the process for what it is. And by that, I mean just accepting that, for me at least, and for a lot of writers I know, first drafts, almost by definition, aren't very good. There's a lot of room for improvement, and I can't judge my efforts all the time. Later on, I become a critic and editor of my own work. But when I'm writing, especially a first draft, I have to kind of put that aside and accept that early drafts might not be very good. And that's hard. It's hard to show up and work for a couple hours and then look at it and just feel like, it's like trying to translate the movie in my head and coming up with a crude pencil sketch is very disappointing. And it's hard to kind of feel like I'm failing. But for me, the antidote to that is that I'm really building a house. I'm putting up 2x4s drywall. It's not pretty. You know, we don't drive by a house that's being under construction and criticize it because it's not very pretty to look at. That's what early drafts are to me. They're 2x4s and drywall. And then over time, they do get better. And eventually that cool part of the process, that wonderful part that I was talking about a minute ago, is where I'm putting in tile and I'm caulking and I'm, you know, spackling and making everything look beautiful. But at the start, it's a little bit crude, and that's okay. Crude is in unfinished, and that's okay. And it helps me to accept that. And it helps me to kind of trust that that's my process. A third thing I do is I tell myself and recognize that fear is the enemy, not the work. And fear is kind of a boogeyman, a bully. You know, I can kind of get past it. I've learned that I can't usually think myself out of it. Action is what works for me against fear. Right thinking follows right acting, not the other way around. I have to show up and get to work. And then if I'm still afraid an hour later, at least I've worked. And the other thing I do is I lower the bar. Especially if I've been away from my work for a little bit, I and it's just hard to get back, or if there's something else going on, if I'm in a mood, whatever, if there's something that's extra hard that I lower the bar, and that means that I tell myself I'm just going to work for half an hour. Even I'm going to work for an hour. This works because it snowballs, and so if I can get myself there for a short period of time, that usually builds, and it kind of breaks the ice or something like that, the log jam. I do, and I do, if I'm having that kind of problem, just coming back to it, I also do an easy part. I don't tackle the hard part right away if I'm having fears or having trouble anyway. I do an easy part. I go to something where I just know I needed to fix that scene a little bit or something like that, and that encourages me, and then I'm on my way a little more. And last, I remind myself and work at being faithful. Writing is a commitment, and like I said, it's a connection, it's even a relationship, and I need to do my part. I do need to show up, and the connection is nurtured and strengthened by me showing up with regularity. So I work at that. Last, so it's hard work. I've got a lot of pages that are never going to see the light of day. The money's not great, if there's even any money. So what's the payoff? When I was a kid, we went to church, and I think I had $1, and Mom said, if you give, God will reward you. So I put my $1 in the plate, and after church we came out, I thought, where's my $2? I thought I was getting it back plus interest or something like that. I like rewards. I like payoffs a lot. That's something I have to work at. But there are payoffs with writing and the writing life, or whatever your work is. One is in the process and just the feeling of a good day's work, whatever that is. That's true across the board. A good day's work pays off in the way I feel afterwards, whatever that is. Maybe a paragraph is finally the way I wanted it to be. Maybe I pushed past something difficult. Maybe I just made a little bit of progress, whatever it is. Progress is progress. Also, writing gives my life a richness that I don't have when I'm not working. I love my life. I have a wonderful husband. I have 2 great kids. I have 5 grandchildren. I have a dog I love. I'm happy. But I love having this other world that I go to, this kind of double life. It just gives it richness. And so even though I love everything here, I love disappearing into that kind of other place. It's just an amazing experience. Also, Shakespeare, to thine own self be true. When I'm working, I do feel like I'm being true to myself, and I'm kind of honoring this deep desire I have that I want to write. And when I'm not working, I feel real sadness inside, which is the last thing, the reward of learning what I'm capable of, and kind of minimizing regrets. I don't want to get to the point of feeling like I could have finished that novel if I just worked a little harder. I want to stay with it, and I want to give it everything I've got, and know that that this was the best I could do, and that gives me peace and joy. On that note, I'll end, and I would love to take questions or talk about other parts of this that you want to talk about. And I hope this made sense and made that you can relate to some of it, but that's how it is for me.
So, Bo, you do have questions, so I'm looking forward to sharing them with you and hearing your answers. And thank you. Your talk, you had me giggling and nearly in tears. Your stories are just inspiring. So thank you for all of that you shared. So one question that we have is, you said about the connection you feel when you're writing. When it feels good, it clicks. It's a meaningful relationship. With whom or what is the relationship? Is it a connection between you and your writing, or between you and the writing portion of your subconscious?
I think the latter. I think it's the writing part of my subconscious. I think it's, but as I said, I think it's to a part of myself that I don't really feel like I access in any other way. You know, that a lot of writers have the experience of, you know, we write something and we read it later, I have no recollection of writing that. It just is, it's kind of, and actually, I think the answer to your question is a little bit of a mystery. I don't know exactly. I just know I like being connected to that place and giving her voice. And, you know, I was just reading, there's a wonderful book. If you're interested in writing, this is a great book. This Year You Write Your Novel by Walter Mosley. And he talks a lot about, and by the way, I don't read it as this year you write your novel. Since I've been working on this for 8 years, I read it as this year you'll write your novel or finish your novel. I am writing it. Anyway, he talks a lot about that connection and why writing every day is so important, because you have to keep the connection to your unconscious. He just does it in those terms, very definite, that you're keeping the connection to your unconscious. But for me, it feels like a little subdivision of my unconscious, just the writer part of it. It feels different than what I think about the unconscious in other ways. I don't know how else to say it. I hope that helps.
Okay. And another question is, do you use music or songs for inspiration when writing? Is there a go-to playlist if you do?
I don't. I like silence when I'm writing. I have a study. I'm upstairs. I'm in my study. There's a lot of stuff up here. It's about a 7x9 room. And I don't like music or anything when I'm writing. Music can get me in the mood to write. I love musical theater. And that can kind of get me excited. But then I might get too excited and feel like going and eating ice cream instead or something like that. But no, I don't have a playlist, and I like, for writing, and I like it quiet in here when I'm working.
Mm-hmm. And who are your favorite authors as a child and then as an adult? You mentioned Nancy Drew, but I imagine you probably grew out of those pretty quickly.
I think those were grade school. I think that, in 5th or 6th grade, I read Gone with the Wind and couldn't put it down. I loved it. The first sentence has never left me. Scarlett O'Hara was not beautiful, but men seldom realized it when caught by her charms, as the Tarleton twins were. It's a great first sentence. And just quickly calling your heroine not beautiful, but, we're just interested immediately. I loved Madeleine L'Engle, A Wrinkle in Time. I still love that book. Childhood, I haven't thought about that for a while. Phantom Tollbooth. I'm kind of drawing a blank on children's. I apologize. I'm ready for you on favorites now, because I'm often asked that, and when I'm asked it, a lot of times my mind goes blank and I can't think of a single author. Mm-hmm. So this funny thing has happened during the pandemic. I was sitting downstairs and just kind of realized that lately I've read several trilogies of one kind or another. And so I gathered a lot of the trilogies, and they're all on one shelf, and they're memoir and fiction. And and they're writers that I love, even aside from the fact that they've written trilogies. One is an English writer, Jane Gardam. She's in her 90s now, I think, and has her book of collected stories came out a couple years ago, but she has many novels, and the trilogy is called the Old Filth Trilogy, and I love it, and I love her writing. Another one, Marilyn Robinson, whose quartet, the Gilead kind of quartet, the 4th book in that just came out a few months ago, and I've just finished it a week or two ago. I love that. Kent Harroff, the Plainsong Trilogy. Hilary Mantel. I bought The Mirror and the Light, the third book in the Wolf Hall trilogy. I bought that at the beginning of the pandemic. Excuse me, one sec. And I thought, oh, great. We have to stay at home. Perfect. I'll read The Mirror and the Light. I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. It's a wonderful book. I couldn't concentrate enough. I've heard a lot of people say that. It was beyond me. And I think I'm better now, and I think I'm ready to get back to it. And kind of And then a couple of favorite books that aren't trilogies. I love Jhumpa Lahiri. I especially love the novel The Lowland. I love Alice Munro. I don't know a lot of her books, but the one I love is The Lives of Girls and Women.
Mm.
I love the stories of John Cheever, Elizabeth Spencer, and Grace Paley. And something I discovered a couple years ago were our memoirs by Anne Truitt, who was a sculptor, and she has 3 books, and they're very much about work. They're about a lot of what I've been talking about. She was a sculptor, but it's also about her. The 3 books are also about her aging, and kind of being aware of it, and kind of seeing herself make accommodations and all that kind of thing. So that's my list for tonight.
I will definitely be watching this YouTube video again because I could not write fast enough. So thank you. So another question that we have is, do you have any favorite writing prompts you like to use to brainstorm or when you're stuck?
I don't, because I've loved working on novels. I love writing novels versus short stories. I haven't written a short story in a very long time. And so if I have a novel going, if I'm feeling stuck or uninspired, I can maybe go to a place I feel good about and maybe work on that a little bit. Or like I said, I'll kind of go to an easy place, but I mostly kind of stay within the novel. I do also use, I mentioned Julia Cameron earlier, I do use morning pages, which is something she suggests, writing 3 pages of longhand in the morning. Mine are rarely morning pages. They're usually afternoon pages. And I know that I'd get more out of them if I put blah, blah, blah. But they have really helped me a lot. So that's kind of the closest thing to a writing prompt, because I kind of get stuff out of my head and work through it there sometimes.
So another question is, do you prefer female authors or male authors, or does it matter to you?
I don't think it matters, except if I notice that I'm reading more men, then I fix that. And and also when I was writing City of Tranquil Light, that's a male narrator. And so I very intentionally read some maybe more first-person male narrated novels, just to kind of hear those men talking in my ear. And a little bit similar with this one, where I'm gravitating more toward female writers. But I kind of don't pay attention unless I feel like, to be honest, sometimes it's easy. I find myself reading a lot more men than women without intending to. And when I notice that, I fix it.
And this is my question. What's it like to have first readers or editors, and when they make suggested changes? I've read in many novels, many authors will acknowledge their first readers. And I think, well, I'm not sure I would want to thank them if they're tossing out my stuff. So what's it like for you?
Well, let's see. I'm not one of those people I'm not in a writing group. I don't have a list of, good friends that I show it to. I have the editor of my first novel, who was then at Chronicle Books. The editor was Jay Schaefer, and he is a wonderful editor. And we got along and just kind of clicked. And so he has helped me with, he works now, he's not at Chronicle Books anymore, he's on his own as a consultant. And so I have asked his help a couple times on this novel, because I trusted his, for me, I think you have to be really careful who you show it to, and you have to be careful about your motives. Am I showing this to this person, especially this relative, because I want approval and I want them to say good things, and I want them, I want to prove myself? There can be all kinds of murky motivations. So I'm careful with that. So I'm really careful about first readers. Also, I neglected to say that one of my favorite writers is Ron Hansen, who happens to be my husband and happens to be a very smart writer. And so he's my first reader, and he's wonderful. And he kind of handles me with kid gloves, I think, but I kind of need that. I'll get to the work later, but he's very careful about how he gives me feedback. So yeah, I kind of agree with you. I'm kind of amazed at those acknowledgments who, thank like 10 people, their first readers and all that. I just, I did that a lot in workshop, and it's not the right thing for me right now.
Yep. Well, there's several more questions. And some of these are process questions, so I've lumped them together. The first one is, what type of organizational system do you use during your process of writing a novel?
Well, organizational system should kind of be in quotes, maybe. Let's see. Honestly, it's different for every novel. It's almost kind of a hard question for me to answer. And especially because these three novels have all, the two novels that are published and this novel that I'm working on, have all required a lot of research. Research is tricky because I can overdo it and feel like I'm writing. And for me, I need to do some research before I start, but then I need to stop researching and write the book, or at least get going on it, because you really don't know what you need. But sometimes when I'm doing early research, it gives me ideas as far as plot or subplot or whatever. And I've tried different, I work on the computer always. I've tried different methods for organizing research. I was a kid who, like, if I was supposed to outline the chapter, I basically had everything in the chapter in the outline. I have a really hard time making those decisions, and that has carried through with me into adulthood. So organization, I just figure out whatever way is going to work for that book. It's kind of like raising kids. What works for one kid might not work for the other.
So you answered part of a person's other question, which is, do you do any writing by hand? How did you start in high school? And did you take a typing class? My mom did make me take typing because she said she's not going to type my term papers. Actually, she made all four of us, boys and girls. And is this an important skill for a writer to be able to type? I have only written, and this person has written a textbook. So this is where she's coming from.
Yes. I usually mention typing as part of my story, and I hadn't thought about it for a while. My dad made me take typing, and I took it when he wrote a friend of mine who was my best friend, and her parents were my parents' best friends. So somehow he talked the parents and the girls, my friend and me, into taking typing. I think it was after 8th grade, maybe. And it was like, I think it was at Glendale College of Business. And so we were there with all these like 18-year-old girls who were ready to be secretaries. They graduated from high school and they were trying to get secretarial positions. And then there were these kind of dorky 13-year-olds from San Marino, not having any of it. But I did learn to type. And actually, he said, whatever you do, you need to know how to write. He was very specific about that. So yes, I think it's very important. I'm kind of amazed when people don't know how to type these days, since we all type all the time, email or whatever. But yes, I think it's very valuable, and it's just a really great thing not to worry about when I'm writing. I think back in high school and college, I worked as a Kelly girl, as a temp secretary. And I think my speed was up to 80 or 90 words a minute. And yeah, I like it that I can type fast.
Nice. And another question is, what's it like being married to an author as you're an author?
It's great. It's great. On levels. Like I said, we have first readers right inside the house, and we understand the trials and tribulations and the ups and downs. And so especially, I don't work at night that often. I do once in a while, but I'll usually just stay downstairs and keep, turn the TV off and keep working. But if my husband's really working and involved in something, a lot of times after dinner, he'll come up for kind of round 2 or round 3 or something in his study upstairs down the hall. And, I know, that's fine. If it never comes into like, but I thought we were going to watch a movie tonight or whatever. It's, we honor those things, and we get, we understand the disappointments, and we understand the process, and, it's just like 2 real estate agents being married to each other. They would have a whole bunch of stuff they'd never have to explain, right? We just kind of focus. Yeah. But I love it. I highly recommend it.
So you mentioned that you write, or you were writing in the library, and now you're in your office. When things open up again, what's going to happen? Where will you be writing?
I would love to go back to the library. I was also even using Starbucks. I don't know what I can't remember what it was exactly that started me going to the library. I mean, sometimes it was research. Sometimes it was kind of easier to get to work at the library. There were the distractions of stacks, but there weren't the distractions of, home. And so I really loved it. And I love, I found my spot at the Cupertino Library. There's a couple of chairs that I like. I went there a lot. And I also started using Starbucks a little bit. I went to several different Starbucks, and I started realizing there's a whole group of us. I started recognizing people from one Starbucks to another who were doing the same thing I was, settling in a chair and getting to work. But yes, I love the library, and I'll be right back there when they let me.
That's encouraging to hear. And another question is, what was ghostwriting like? Because it's not your voice.
No, but I think the reason I got those jobs is that I was good at mimicking. I think it was because I was a fiction writer, and I could write like a certain character that, the books I ghost wrote or edited were always in the first person. They were either business books or memoirs. And I was able to sound like these men. It was all men that I wrote for. But I was able to sound like them from spending time with them and reading what they wrote, that I was going to edit or something like that. So it was great. I have loved making my living, and I have a generous husband who supports us. But even contributing, I have loved being able to do that by writing. And as I said, I kind of burned out on teaching. And I feel like even when I'm writing something completely unrelated to my novel, I'm using the same muscles. That pays off. And so it's, again, that belief that no writing is wasted. It feels good to me to have written whatever it is.
And another question, I just want to remind everybody to please send your questions in. We have a few more minutes left, and I don't want to let anybody left out in the cold. So this is your opportunity. And so the question is, how do you find readers to be your critic, and suggestions to improve and use these critics to improve new writers? And is it best to take a class?
How do you find people to read your work? Is that kind of okay? I found classes to be so valuable and so helpful. I took classes, as I said, for a long time. And I would use them. Let's see, I took a couple classes at Foothill early on, like back in 78, 79, when I was early working for IBM, I think. And then I think I was in the first creative writing class that Stanford Continuing Studies offered. And John LaRue taught it. And that's how I met him. I hadn't known him as an undergrad. I think he wasn't there right then or something like that. But I took 2 classes from John LaRue early on. And yes, those classes were wonderful because they gave me deadlines, which was great. And then, we were reading each other's work. Some of those friendships I kept up for a while, but there's nobody that I'm still in touch with from those days. But yes, they were very valuable. And the other thing is summer writing conferences, like Squaw Valley Community of Writers. That was really valuable to me too. There's also Napa community of writers or something like that, because I would kind of work toward that all year. And so I would work and try to get, 2 or 3 stories, or I was writing all stories back then. I would try to get stories ready, and the goal would be that summer where I would have them workshopped, and then you can usually also work with a writer individually. So they gave me deadlines, and I found classes, and I think people also find writing groups more easily than they used to. It doesn't even have to be a class. Sometimes it's a group of people meeting together and reading each other's work. It doesn't have to be an instructor kind of a thing. Yeah, I think they're great ways to go.
So a last question is, I've had several people ask, what is the subject of your new book? They really want to know. Is there any kind of hint that you would be willing to share with us?
I can give you the bare bones. Like, this is about a woman, 1955. She's 31 years old, lives in Oklahoma City, and her young husband dies very suddenly. And in her grief, she takes a job. She sees an ad in the paper and takes a job as an archaeological assistant for an archaeologist who's going over to Turkey on a survey. And she, in order to snap herself out of it and just kind of, she's just desperate she's desperate from grief. She goes with him, and then a lot of stuff happens.
Thank you for sharing.
So far, it's called Artifacts.
Okay. Well, we know your name, so that's what we'll really look for. And this is a wonderful way to wrap it up. I want to read this comment from one of our viewers. Thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed this webinar. Your speaking, storytelling style is very comfortable. Amazing how you could address the audience so fluidly without seeing us. I often found myself nodding in agreement to your sentiments. I was inspired to continue writing and appreciate the detailed guidance on how to press on.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
I will save that for you.
Thank you. It was just very weird because like I said, I was nervous about this because when I've done this sort of thing in person, I'm usually pretty comfortable, and it's always a great night to me to see your faces, and I can get reactions and see if I can tell if I'm starting to talk too fast and all that. And right. Me in this little green light, and thank you for being there. But I'm glad it made sense and everything. And it was my pleasure to be with all of you. And I'm glad there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and we'll be doing things in person maybe before too long.
Yeah, the timing for this talk was really good because we can see that light. It's getting brighter. And yeah. Donna says, we are thoroughly enjoying your sharing. So as a wrap up, I want to say, yep, there's another thank you coming. They're coming in. First, I want to acknowledge and thank our 2 county librarians, Bryant Bow and Devin Simpson. They are our technical gurus. They've been behind the scenes managing our virtual logistics. Thank you so much for making this run smoothly. And I also want to thank all of our audience, the ones that are here present today and the ones that will be watching on YouTube. Your questions have been invigorating. So be sure to check Lolly's and the library's websites for the YouTube link, and be sure to check out Bo's books at the library and at your neighborhood bookstore. I will return this tomorrow. I had finished it, but I wanted to hang on to it for the talk today. Both books have just been delightful to read. I read the first one probably about 5 years ago and just fell in love with it. And I started rereading it just a couple of weeks ago.
Thank you.
So thank you for writing those. And Bo, thank you. Thanks for your thoughtful talk with us tonight. Your talk was like a story, all the things tied together, and it just came together so well for me. And thanks for writing both of your novels. And because of today's talk, I have a deeper appreciation and understanding of those books because of what you've shared. So I look forward to reading your next novel, and I'm going to go look at your short stories. I had no idea that those were also out there. So, and thank you again, audience, and look for the YouTube recording.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Night, night, everyone.